Hi everyone, my name is Maddie. So for our Educational Giants project, I was assigned Soren Kierkegaard. Soren Kierkegaard is Danish, so it's kind of tricky to pronounce. It's Soren Kierkegaard. Yeah, that took me forever to get. So a little background on Soren before I get into the details. I'm not gonna lie, from what I read, he seems a little bit crazy. Soren, he is very harsh, very blunt. He says exactly what he wants to say, how he wants to say it, and when he wants to say it. He does not hold back. He is also kind of the sassiest person ever. I'll give you some examples later on with some quotes that I'll share. But to give a little bit of his biography background, Soren was born in Copenhagen, Denmark, to his parents Michael and Anne. His dad actually inherited a fabric company from his uncle, so they were a very rich family at the time. Before Michael, his parents had 6 other children, so he was the youngest of 7. Soren's dad was actually a little bit crazy. He always insisted that their family was paranoid and that the worst things were going to happen to them. So there was definitely a negative impact on Soren's childhood. He said himself, quoted, that he was born old. He had no childhood. He was just thrust into adulthood. By the time Soren reached his mid-20s, 5 of his 6 older siblings had actually died, including his parents. So death was constantly just surrounding his family. And not to help that fact, his last name translates to churchyard or graveyard. So it's just kind of this looming negativity over Soren's entire life. Moving on to education, Soren first attended the School of Civic Virtue. It has a really fancy Danish name that I'm not even going to try to pronounce, but it was one of the nicest schools in Denmark where Soren received a classic education. It was taught mostly in Danish, but it was actually rumored that Soren was terrible at Danish. He was terrible at speaking it, terrible at reading it, and awful at writing it. They also taught Latin at the school. There was definitely an emphasis in Latin, so Soren definitely focused on that. He, in a lot of his papers, although they were required in Danish, he would write them in Latin and German. So he couldn't speak Danish, but somehow he picked up German along the way. After he finished at the School of Civic Duty, which seemed to kind of be a K through 12 kind of deal, he attended the University of Copenhagen. He originally enrolled for theology and then later switched to literature. Afterwards, to graduate, he wrote his master's dissertation on the concept of irony. This is definitely one of his most famous works. It's called The Concept of Irony, with common references to Socrates, and it was written in 1841. Let's see. Afterwards, so other major works of his were The Fear and Trembling and Either Or. The book is literally called Either Or. These are some of his major works, but he has written dozens of others that he is very well known for. It's actually said that he wrote up to 3 whole works in a single day. A little bit on his romantic background. He was engaged at one point and then mysteriously broke off the engagement for a reason he wouldn't even tell his fiancée. There's actually different rumors about whether it was religious or educational, but he kept it to himself. He never told anyone why they broke up. So, the reason that I am doing this report on Soren Kierkegaard, moving on to the point, he is the father of existentialism, which you may or may not have read a little bit about already, but according to Planting Mighty Oaks, the book that we commonly refer to, existentialism is subjectivity and personal choice over scientific objectivity. So Soren was a pretty religious guy. He believed, the way that I understood it, I tied it to the atonement and our free agency. Soren believed that man is accountable for their sins and that we will either be punished or rewarded for them. The assumption that individuals are free and responsible for their own actions. So basically Soren thought that, we needed to be held accountable. He actually had some funny sayings where some quotes that you can look up, that he pretty much told people to get off their butts and do what they needed to do. One of the funniest quotes that I found is one, he says, "People demand freedom of speech as compensation for the freedom of thought which they seldom use." So basically he's saying that people should not really speak if they don't have something to say. I thought it was pretty funny, just like I said earlier, he's a pretty sarcastic guy. So anyway, his impact on education. his theory of existentialism. It pretty much, I think, motivates teachers to teach their students that they are accountable for their actions. I mean, how else are we going to learn? You know, we get the grades that we work for, or we don't get the grades that we don't work for. So I think it's, whether teachers will admit it or not, it's kind of an underlying tone in everyone's education, the way that all teachers teach. So I thought it was pretty cool. It's not something that's very prominent, but it's definitely something that is there. So yeah, Soren Kierkegaard, he was a pretty cool guy. To kind of close on an awkward note, he actually died really young, 42, of a terrible spinal disease. But yeah, his impact still influences education today, and he was a great guy. So yeah, that was Soren Kierkegaard. Thanks for listening.